Hello, Booktube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. Well, once again, I don't know if you can see outside, but once again, you've caught me right before bedtime over here. So I'm going to try and keep this video relatively short. I can't complain too much, though. I have had time this week to film videos. Earlier in this week, I filmed a started video for the Peloponnesian War by Donald Kagan. And then yesterday, I managed to have time in my schedule to do a video review of the histories by Herodotus. And then just this morning, I filmed a video on all the books I was currently reading. Currently reading having a somewhat flexible definition. I explained it all in that video. That was something that was suggested by William over at William's Library. Um, so yeah, 3 videos done this week. I'll put them all down in the description down below. In terms of reading, I finished off Tarzan of the Apes. So a review is coming for this hopefully sometime this week, if I don't end up getting too busy. I don't know. My wife wants to travel on this coming weekend, but it remains to be seen if it's all going to come together. If we don't travel, then this weekend I'll do the review of this. You know, it's not. It was a lot of fun to read, but it's not great literature in the sense that it's not overly deep, very surface level. So there's not a lot of thoughts that I need to collect. But after having this past week, my mind was just focused on getting the review done for Herodotus. So now I'm shifting gears towards Tarzan. But yeah, so point being, finished this book off this past week, and the review is now coming hopefully sometime this coming week. And then the Peloponnesian War, I've read up to page 96 of this. And am enjoying it so far. A little bit of fussing about with the maps, but the maps for this book are in the text. Now, every so often you have to flip a few pages backwards or forwards to find the exact map being referenced. But much improved experience over this edition of Herodotus, where the maps were all buried in the back. But yeah, I'm finding this really interesting. Although I think a book like this has a niche audience. The niche audience being you've got to be curious about the Peloponnesian Wars. If you're not curious about it, then there's going to be a whole lot of stuff in here you're not going to care about. Although in his in the started video I did for this book, I referenced Donald Kagan's Open Yale University course available on YouTube on the Greek world. And in one of those videos, he talks about this book and says it did amazing sales numbers. I don't remember what figure he actually says, but it says it really surprised him and it surprised his publisher. Neither of them were expecting that many sales. But Donald Kagan chalked it up to the idea that there were a whole lot of people out there who their whole lives they'd been told that they needed to read about the Peloponnesian War, but they hadn't, they had been told it was something that they needed to know about, but had never read up on. So when he published a 1-volume popular history on it, it hit a niche. So if you're one of those people who's been kind of told their whole lives that you need to study the Peloponnesian Wars, and then here's a chance to actually get into it, it does have. It's interesting. The introduction to this book, he mentions that he had been talked into writing a 1-volume history of the Peloponnesian War, and when I first read that, I thought 1 volume. I mean, the thing's like 500 pages long. How many volumes do you need? But then later on in his introduction, he said he had previously published a 4-volume history of the Peloponnesian War for a scholarly audience. And certainly in the beginning parts of this book, especially, you really do get the sense that there's a lot of history just being condensed here. A lot of names of like very influential, supposedly very influential Greek statesmen will just pop up and then disappear. That they'll come in and out of the narrative so quickly. There's so much going on. So yeah, in a way, you want more as a reader. And I don't know, maybe one of these days I'm gonna have to track down and read Thucydides. I'm definitely gonna have to read Thucydides one of these days. I hope I still have this copy with me when I finally get it. Yeah. Sorry, lost my train of thought. I had mentioned that I had previously listened to Donald Kagan's lectures on open Yale University courses, and he does talk in some detail on the Peloponnesian Wars in those lectures. So a lot of this is kind of none of it was in my active memory. Like if you had sat me down and you had said to me, "Tell me about the Peloponnesian Wars," I couldn't have told you hardly anything. But it's in there in the passive memory. Like as I'm going through this book, I'm like, oh yeah, I vaguely remember that part in the lecture. But the problem with listening to it as a lecture, especially the way I did it, where I had the YouTube lectures on in the background, is it's very easy for this stuff to kind of wash over you without really grabbing on to the structure. Reading in a book is helping me get the structure of the Peloponnesian Wars a lot more. There are a number of interesting things in here. I mean, one of the interesting things about the Peloponnesian War is that in some ways it's not a very interesting conflict. It's just, this long conflict between two Greek city-states. And if you put this in the broader scope of history, where there are all these wars happening between all these little city-states and countries and tribes and stuff like that, it seems like, okay, well, what's so big about the Peloponnesian War? But what makes the Peloponnesian War a big deal is it happened right at the pinnacle of Greek civilization. And this is something that Donald Kagan highlights in his introduction. So right when you had all these Greek poets and all these Greek dramatists and all these Greek philosophers, like right when Greece was at the height of its cultural significance, you have this war, and it pretty much destroyed the Greek world, and it destroyed that golden age. So I think that's why the Peloponnesian War is one of the reasons why it's still largely remembered today. It's interesting to think, when does why do these golden ages occur during history, right? So you've got all these hundreds of years of history where there's not much that we remember. And then there's like 50 years from ancient Greece where it produced all this ancient Greek literature that's still being studied 2,000 years later. And, the age-old question, does a culture ever know when it's in its golden age? Like, are we in a golden age right now of, I don't know, of something? So there's that. The other interesting thing in here is now this is something I do remember from Donald Kagan's YouTube lectures. He's very interested about when there are two different empires and they're opposed to each other, but they both know that war will be devastating. How do you maintain the peace, and how do you avoid slipping into war? Because you don't, on the one hand, you don't want war. On the other hand, you don't want to appear weak before the other power. You don't want to give the appearance that the other power is pushing you around. And it was clear from his YouTube lectures that was a preoccupation of his. And that comes through very clearly in the first 50 pages of this book, where he talks about all these little diplomatic incidents which were flaring up between Athens and Sparta. As well, both cities were the lead power of a system of alliances. So they were trying to control their allies and make sure their allies didn't start wars. I guess the obvious parallel is between the United States and the Soviet Union, where both countries had a whole system of satellite states, and they wanted to keep their satellite states in line to make sure that a larger conflict didn't break out. And yeah, that whole thing about where both sides clearly don't want war, but then because of a whole chain of events, they feel like they're getting forced into it. I mean, what else is interesting in here? There does seem to be an ideological side to the war. The different Greek city-states are allying with Spartans or Athens, and in each case, the democratic faction of the city-states is more pro-Athenian. The oligarchic faction of the city-state is more pro-Sparta, with the various other Greek city-states. But Donald Kagan isn't hitting too hard on the ideology part of it, although he is talking about some of the interesting features of Athenian democracy at the time. Pericles and Pericles' funeral oration gets talked about, and this is one of those things I keep hearing references to Pericles' funeral oration, but didn't really know what it is. In fact, I guess maybe this is embarrassing to admit, I thought it was the oration given for Pericles' funeral, but it wasn't. It's a funeral oration given by Pericles. So that talked about that. And after reading it, then I went onto YouTube and searched for somebody reading the whole text of Pericles' funeral oration, and was listening to that last night. Because Donald Kagan talks about it, and he quotes a couple paragraphs from it. But I found it interesting to just listen to the whole thing. There are people who read the whole thing on YouTube. So I'm gonna cut it short here. Like I said, it's bedtime over here, so don't want to ramble on too long. As always, in the description down below, I will leave a link to the Booktube videos that I watched this past week, and I'd recommend all of them. So check out that list, click on some of those videos if you like, and I'll finish off for today.